Hello, my name is Bob Brown, and it's my privilege to host this show, which is based on the reality that Westborough is a great town filled with interesting people. Many of them are long-term residents who have so many memories and stories about life in Westborough in days gone past. And so your local cable station, Westborough TV, has initiated this series of programs which are designed to reflect upon life in earlier days and to possibly make suggestions about how we can improve life in this fine town for the future.
For a long time, I've wanted to have Polly Howard share some time with us to tell her story. When I asked her, she said, well, there's nothing extraordinary about my life. And I thought about that, and I said, you know something, with the kind of life that Polly has lived, she would call that very ordinary, and it was. But in the living of that life, it has become extraordinary. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you here, Polly. I thank you for coming and being willing to tell us your story. So,
thank you, Bob.
Without a lot of introductions, would you just tell us about your upbringing, where you were?
I grew up in northern Maine, about as far as you can go. From my home west, it's all was woods, a town of 2,000. You knew everyone, and everyone knew you, so you behaved yourself pretty well. Because anything wrong, my mother would find out about it before we ever got home. But we could go anywhere and in the woods, and we just had so much fun. There weren't very many of us. I graduated from high school with 16. But it was a great town to grow up in. Then I went to the University of Maine.
Let's give them some of the geography now. The town is what?
Ashland, Maine. It's 59 miles south of Fort Kent, which is the tip of Maine. Going east, it's 30 miles from Easton, which is the border east of us. So we were in Canada a lot.
How far is it from here? Holton is, for us, is 400 miles.
Well, then it's 460 miles because we're 60 miles above Holton.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we're talking way up there, folks. We're talking about right up on the Canadian border in northern Maine.
Yep.
And this is a very interesting part of the world. So I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When I was growing up, it was some lumbering, and the big lumbering had been before I was born, and then it dropped off and it was all potatoes. And then later on, when I got older, it went back to lumbering. And they had more woods, the trucks could haul logs farther, and so the lumbering came back strong. We had a mill in Ashland that was the largest automated mill east of the Mississippi River.
Now, when you say mill, is this for lumber or for paper?
No, lumber.
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 Okay.
There was pulp, too. They hauled the pulp to Millinocket or floated it down the rivers. Mm-hmm. And then when that became illegal, they trucked everything. And they trucked it for, some of it 100 miles.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law was in charge of all the woods roads, and they were smooth.
And what were those roads like? What were they? They were nice paved road with stripes?
No, they were all dirt roads, but they were pretty well maintained. Yeah. And you hit a few potholes, and when you were riding in a Jeep, you knew it.
And the interesting part of that is that for construction of roads in Maine, they say that the base has to be at least 4 feet deep to get below the level of frost. So when you build a road, you don't just plow it off and put a truck on it. You've got to really do a lot of construction of that road before it'll support the trucks.
I don't know if you knew, Bob, but you know the 9 Mile Woods.
Yes, I do.
That road, in the spring, they used to keep a state truck at either end to pull the cars out of the mud. And then someone got the bright idea to dynamite the whole thing, and it just turned the whole thing upside down and gave them a base, and they didn't have any trouble after that.
They did that down in China. China, Maine, at the very end of that lake, there's a road that goes around the base of that lake.
Yeah.
It was all swampy. And that's what they did. They put a ton of dynamite down in the swamp, didn't do any digging, just put it in there, put the fill on top of it, and then blew it, and all the muck came out, and the fill settled down on top.
Interesting.
Yeah, fascinating.
When we would go to Bangor, which was our big city, and we didn't go much in the wintertime, and in the spring you didn't go down through the Patton Woods. Now, Ashland was 60 miles from the main road going to Bangor. You didn't go that way. You went around by Presque Isle because the roads were so bad.
Yeah.
And our travel was pretty much local.
Yeah.
My father had a garage that was closed in the wintertime because the roads weren't plowed. And we had rollers that rolled them. And I have a picture of one. People said there's no such thing. Well, yes, there was.
Rolled the snow.
Yeah, rolled it hard for the horses.
Right.
But Dad cut wood all winter. He walked about 3 miles, 4 miles up in the woods, and they walked to stay warm. And I would go down to the bridge to meet Dad when he was coming home. We were a mile up the hill from the Aroostook River, and I'd get down there and wait for him because I never saw him. He'd come home and eat and go to bed early and leave at 4 in the morning.
Now, when you say cold, we think it's cold here. How was it cold up there?
Well, I know it got to, I think it got to 40 below one time.
Yeah.
And maybe even colder, I don't know. But we didn't think much of it. We went out anyway, but we dressed for it.
Well, you used to say it was a dry cold, so it's not really cold.
Right, but we wore wool. And I talk about wool today, people say it doesn't make any difference. Well, it does.
Absolutely.
And we had heavy mittens and we had the clothes. We stayed out all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but we played winter sports. You didn't play basketball and you didn't play those things. You stayed out. We had a wonderful skating rink that the firemen flooded twice a week. And the boards were built up on the side, and a log cabin was brought in, and there was always a fire in there for you to go in and get warm. And as I remember it, nobody ever carved their name in the benches or anything like that. They respected things back then because we didn't have a lot.
Right.
I thought we were the wealthiest people in town. We didn't have anything.
Yeah.
But my mother made all of our clothes, and we ate very well because we had a big garden.
Sure.
And so I had a wonderful childhood.
Who was at home?
Mom and Dad, and I had 2 older brothers and an older sister. I was the baby. And small house. We had 3 bedrooms. And heated by a wood stove in the kitchen and a wood stove in the living room. And I think I was in college when Dad built a furnace out of 2 big oil drums. And that heat would drive you right out of the house. And with wood, of course.
Yeah.
And
those old barrel stoves were great stoves.
yeah, well, Dad, I thought my father was a genius. Well, I thought he was anyway.
Yeah.
But he built that, and Mom had to, we made Mom give it up when she was trying to lift those logs. And she hated the oil stove, hated it.
Yeah.
It didn't heat like the wood.
That's
and
right.
I never can understand that.
Yep.
But wood's the best.
It is.
There's a plug for you.
That's right. Well, I heat my house with wood. So
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Now, I'm pretending to know a lot about what Polly's talking about because years ago when I married my wife, her family came from northern Maine in a town called Holton, which Polly also knew because she used to go down to Holton. And in Holton, on the edge of Holton, there's a town called New Limerick where we built a camp because we fell in love with the lake up there, and Bobby's family was so big we couldn't fit everybody into the camp. So I built a second one up the lake with a friend from home. And we used to go up there and skin dive and stuff. But on that lake was a pavilion. And Polly knows something about the pavilion.
We used to drive 60 miles to go to the dances down there. And I was always surprised, even then, that Mom would let me do it. But it was just a bunch of girls. And we'd go down and we'd stay till the last dance. And it was built out over the water with a porch all the way around. Right. And then the sides were wooden and they opened up. So it was an open pavilion. And we'd go once a week.
Yep. And right across the lake from that was a green camp. And that was Bobby's family's camp. And underneath that pavilion you're talking about is where they kept their boat.
Oh, yes.
So they'd come to the pavilion to row across the lake.
They used to have a big boat on that lake.
The Mabel.
Just like they had on Portage Lake, where I spent all my summers.
Yeah. The steamboat named the Mabel. And the reason for that was, as Polly has indicated, lumber was big time up there. And Holton at that time was one of the richest towns in the country.
Yes, it was.
And they built this promenade walking along the shore and this pavilion, and they had the Mabel, a steam-powered boat that they would come down in their finest dress on Sunday afternoon and go out on the lake and putter around up and down, back and forth. We found the propeller for that boat in the lake. The legend was that it was scuttled. And I think I found where the stack is. It's a big stack sticking out of the mud up around behind an island up there. We haven't gone in to explore it at all, but I'd love to see if I couldn't bring that up. My son Glenn gave me a picture of the Mabel which I hang in my den. It's a beautiful old boat.
Well, we had two on Portage Lake. One at down at the head of the lake where the planes later on were had a landing, and then the Daggetts up the lake had one. And when Dad built our camp, there were 4 men from Washburn, Maine, bought the land, and they built 4 camps. Ours was the smallest. And my mother hated it because she had to cart 4 kids and all the stuff, put it in that boat down the head of the lake, take it over to the camp, take it out, and then she was stuck there with 4 kids, and Dad would go back to work early in the morning and get home late at night.
Yeah.
Later on, she loved it, but I can understand with 4 kids.
4 little kids, yeah.
It was not an easy chore.
That's right.
And, but we went, it was only 10 miles from home, and we used to walk out there a lot as kids and go swimming and walk back again. Think nothing of it.
So going along with my theme of being ordinary to become extraordinary, the ordinary part of it was you raised your own food primarily to
Everything.
eat. You cut your own firewood and you heated your own place. Everything was done by hand, and there was nobody you could call to come in and just do everything for you. You had to do it. So it was a life that was really hard scrabble, but at the time you thought it was joyous.
Well, Mom and Dad made us think that everything we did was fun.
Yeah.
When we stacked the wood, when I think Dad got it in tree lengths for work that he'd done for someone else, he'd cut it up. Or the guy would come with a crosscut saw, I think, and cut it up stove wood length. Dad would chop it all. We piled it. Then we had to unpile it, throw it in the cellar, go down cellar, and stack it up again. And then you had to bring it upstairs, put it in the wood box. Then you had to take the ashes out.
Right.
So when I think of how many times, we didn't think you didn't think it was work. And we often had the kids come and help us, and Mom would have a hot dog roast for them.
Yeah, I often think when I'm working in the wood pile, how many times have I picked this piece of wood up?
Right. And the kids that would come to help us, there were an awful lot of poor families in Ashland. And my very best friend, they slept on the floor and in their clothes. And when they came up to the house to eat, that's probably pretty much what they had to eat. Their major meal was potatoes cut up with the peelings on, fried on the top of the stove. No frying pan, right? And the stove was a mess. But those tasted so good. And Helen and I tried it just once. And it took us about 2 weeks to clean the stove. And so we never did that again. But they didn't have anything to eat. So when Mom would have a hot dog roast or something, that was great for them. And there were probably 13 in that family.
Well, one of our good friends lived in Hodgton, which is in a town, I guess, east of Holton. They had a house with 2 bedrooms, but they had 11 kids. So the rule was that at a certain age, you could come in from sleeping in the barn, and you could finally lie crosswise in the bed. So a lot of the kids really spent their nights among the cattle in the barn.
Yeah.
And that was all they had.
That's where my husband's family came from, was Hodgton. And that was a big, big family.
Yeah.
And all boys. No, there were 2 girls. And I think 11 boys.
Yeah.
And that's why Hal's father liked me, was because I was from Rooster County.
Right. That's right.
But I left. The only college I applied to was the University of Maine, because that's the only one we could afford. And I think my tuition was $50 a semester. But that was hard to come by because, as I said, Dad had a big family, and the garage was closed in the wintertime. And then you went through the war where gas was rationed, and it wasn't easy pickings by any means.
No.
When I look back and think how hard Dad worked. And we had an enormous garden, and I hated that garden. I won't garden today because of it, but when I think of how good the food tasted all winter long, but you were always fixing beans or cutting up cucumbers for pickles, or there was always something to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
now, you mentioned it on the lake, you had airplanes.
yes,
You have a little history with airplanes.
yes, I do. The first time I flew, a friend of mine's folks had very famous fish camps up on Fish Lake. They were on an island. And all the supply, well, a lot of the supplies they brought through in the winter on sleds. But in the summer when they needed things, it was always flown in. And I had always had, why, I don't know, I'd always had a fascination with planes. And I got a call one day, and they said if I could be out to Portage in an hour, I could fly up to Bobby's camp. And Mom didn't have the card, and Dr. Haggerty happened to be visiting with Mom at the time, and he said, I'll take her out. So he took me out to the lake, and I got down to the wharf, and it was a float plane. And I got in, and Jerry said, you've got to lay on top of everything. And there were 100-pound bags of flowers and boxes of canned stuff and everything. So I laid out flat. And the plane back then, the one half of the door came up and one went down. We were taxiing up the lake. And Jerry says, Polly, you got to hold the door because it's broken. So here I am holding the door. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And that was my first introduction to being in a plane. And I just fell in love with flying. And when I got older, I used to walk for our camp down to where the planes were. I think it was about 2 miles. And I'd walk down there and sit all day long and wait for a plane, somebody to ask me to go up. And they did. There were probably 3 or 4 planes there most of the time. And I'd go up with anybody. And we'd fly to any lake they were going to, and I'd sit in the plane or sit on the wharf while they did their business, and then we'd fly back. And a very good friend of mine taught me how to fly. And he ended up being an instructor with the Wasps during the war. And but between he and my brother, I never paid for a plane, I never paid for gas, I never paid for instruction. And the people don't believe me, but I could walk down there. Once I knew how to fly, I could walk down, and if the planes were there, I could go in and I'd just write a note, I've taken the plane, Jerry, or I've taken the plane, Reno. And I'd fly to some lake. I'd just fly around, and I just was in heaven. And I'd come back, and I'd say what time I left and what time I got back. I never paid for gas. I never paid for a blessed thing. I was so lucky. And my brother took me to get my license over. We had to go to Caribou. And he said, let's go for a ride day. He was home from, he was a pilot of B-24s during the war, and 29s. And he said, let's go for a ride. So I went for a ride. He was home on furlough, and we went to the Caribou airport. And I thought, something's going on here. He says, you're going to get your license today. I said, Billy, I can't get it today. It's snowing. He says, it's today or never. So in the Caribou airport, you took off from the runway just like in Augusta, and down it went. So you either flew or you dropped. And I got my license that day. And I just, that was the biggest thrill of my lifetime. And everyone was so good. And in the winter, we flew on skis.
When you were on the lake, though, you were pontoons, weren't you?
Yeah, oh yes.
And that's an entirely different animal.
Very much different, yeah.
You got to break a pontoon free.
But I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. And I did something I shouldn't have done. Well, I've probably done that a lot of times. But my brother happened to be home, and we had an old wooden orange boat. And I was flying around. And I had someone with me, but I was doing the flying. And decided I wanted to do a loop-de-loop. You don't do that with pontoons. No. I had done it with other people. So I went up, got a pretty good altitude, and came down, and I just came down right, and I just skimmed the lake. And my brother was out in the middle of the lake shaking his fist. And I thought, he's going to be down at the wharf when we get in. And he gave the guy the devil. It was Jimmy Robinson, I think was his name. He gave him the devil for letting me do such a thing. He said, well, that's what she wanted to do. So that was that. Yeah. But no, I was a spotter during World War II.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, you walked out, there was an old farmhouse out on the ridge going toward Presque Isle, and I think we decided it was about 4 miles. It was manned all the time. The only furniture in the place was a table, 2 chairs, and a telephone, and an outhouse out back. And I wanted to do it. And the man who was in charge of it said no way was he going to let any women do it. And my dad said, if you really want to do it, write to the governor. So I wrote, it was Governor Sewell. And so I wrote to him, and I told him my story, and he wrote back, and he wrote a letter to Hugh Bartlett as well, and said, absolutely, if she has that much interest, she can do it. And he gave me a hard time at first, and he finally got over it. But I'd go out, I'd start out walking Saturday morning, and I'd spend all day Saturday out there. And you had to give them the kind of a plane it was, the altitude you thought it was flying, and the direction it was flying in, and how many there were. And if you couldn't see them, you had to kind of judge it by the motor. They all had a different sound. It was an awful lot of B-17s, because they were bringing the wounded back from Europe to Presque Isle. Then from Presque Isle, they'd put them on trains to take them to the hospitals.
Yeah.
And, but I just thought I saved the war.
Yeah. You did.
And I did that, oh golly, I don't know how long as the program lasted.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure many people watching can remember what took place during the Second World War, but there are many who have no idea.
No, I know it.
And what this country had to do to win that war, but also to protect itself, because you just didn't know. This was a brand new experience for us. We didn't have any idea when the Germans were coming or the Japanese were coming. You didn't have the kind of communication you have now. And so what you were doing was a part of it. Part of what I was doing was night patrols in the neighborhood, going around looking at people's houses and making sure the lights were off.
Do you remember, or maybe you don't, we had to paint the top of the headlights on the car
just
black.
A little slick.
Yeah.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But you did it, everyone, and you collected aluminum.
Absolutely.
We had a pile of aluminum in our town, and my mother missed her stew pot or her soup pot that she said, I'll bet those sweat kids took it uptown. She said, you go up and find it. Well, I felt like a fool. Here it is. And of course, it was way up in the pile. So I had somebody who, every time I stepped on something, of course, it would fall, and I'd step again and it would fall. But I finally got it.
Yeah.
And Mom gave them the dickens for coming in the shed and taking it. But and you saved the aluminum that gum came wrapped in a paper with the aluminum. You stripped that off.
Made a ball.
And our barber in town collected it. You'd collect so much, and he'd give you a penny.
Yeah.
And you did a lot of things, and I don't know as I thought I was doing anything that was out of the ordinary. No, every kid did it.
That's right.
And you just did it.
It's one of the few times that this country has really come together where everybody was participating.
Exactly.
There was no hanging back.
No.
Everybody had to jump in and do their part.
I don't know what year it was, but there was a very famous conductor of a New York Philharmonic, I think it was, and he had a place on the coast of Maine. And he went walking every morning. And he was out walking, and he saw this little sub come in, and two people get out of it. And he said, he just kept on walking and went to the firehouse, which was a place where you took any information you had. And they caught them, and they were from Germany. And I'm sure that happened a lot that we didn't know about.
Yeah. Well, they caught a German spy in my neighborhood in the bathtub. Nailed him right there.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of that. Let me take you back again to where Ashland and Holton really are. There's a long stretch of road that goes from Bangor up. What's that stretch like? You see a lot of people on that road, do you?
No. There's one road that goes from Ashland down through what we call the Patton Woods. It was 60 miles of woods. You didn't do it in the wintertime. You went around by Presque Isle, which put about 30 miles on your travel, but you just didn't do it. And now it's a great road.
Yep.
But no, we didn't do too much traveling that way in the winter. But it was there's long, and then there's the 9 Mile Woods, and that's where the road is. They turned upside down, and but there's a lot of empty space up there.
Route 2 was the Haynesville Road, Haynesville Woods Road, Haynesville Woods Road, and they wrote a song about that, about a trucker who went off the road and they never found him. You think he's still driving off through the woods.
And that fellow that wrote that song, made it famous, was from up around there somewhere, from Macquahawk or one of those little towns. Yeah, and I turned our TV on one night, and it was on our local station, but I got Northborough, and he was performing over there. Now, I don't know how old the show was, but I couldn't believe it. And when he sang that song, boy.
Isn't that a great song?
Yeah, brought a lot of memories back.
I did, guess I did, yeah.
But we didn't think we were so far away, and we had an awful lot going. Every little town had a summer festival. They had a winter carnival. So there was an awful lot going on. In the winter, you snowshoed, you skied, you walked in the woods.
Yep. Yep. I think most of those towns are like that. We've been many times to the potato fests in Holton when the potato crop starts to come in, the peas and the potatoes.
Yeah.
Special time for that. The peanut parade with the kids.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff.
There was always something to do.
And the 4th of July parade with everybody brought out their best tractor and put in the parade. And
I can remember when I was a little kid in our 4th of July parade, this was awful, but they had a flatbed truck, or they took the sides off of it, and they had a person in a bed that was in a hospital bed, and they had 2 angels, and I was an angel. And Mom made these outfits for her and had the wings and everything, and when I think of it, you know, what a crazy thing it was.
well, I know, and you've reminded me of something that we did. When we were building the camp, there were camps on the far side of the lake, but none on our side. And so we'd have to bring lumber from the far end of the lake all the way up on a raft, tow it up with a boat. And Bobby's aunt revealed one day that she had a friend who was watching us, who would kind of report, there they go, there's another load going up. And they'd get on the phone and they'd be talking to each other. There they're going again. So George and I said, well, let's have some fun with this. So when we were finally bringing the furniture in. We were bringing a bed and a nightstand and a few other items. We put them on the raft. And I went to bed. And he's towing me up the lake and I'm lying in bed. And she's reporting this all over town. Now you don't see what they're doing now. Guy's either drunk or something's happening. He's going up to the bed in the boat. So we had more fun with that. And then the next time we were sitting on the porch, and this same aunt was looking across the lake with her glasses.
Yeah.
And she caught a woman who was looking back at her. The eyes met right in the middle of the lake.
Yeah, yeah. We used to have the, what did they call it? Everybody was on one line. Telephone line.
Yeah.
Not company, that wasn't it.
No. It was,
But when we'd go out to the lake, we'd pick up the phone and you'd try to pick it up early and you'd listen to everybody talking.
Right. That's right.
But, no, it was fun growing up there.
So you eventually got old enough to marry, and who did you
I
meet?
went to the University of Maine, and I met Hal, who was from Madison, Maine, and he'd been in the service 6 years.
What service? Army?
Yes, he was in the engineers, yeah. And it always made me laugh, because poor Hal, I fixed more things around the house than he could. I think he played that up. But anyway, we met my senior year, and we got married at the end of that year, and he had gotten a job with the CIA. He was a very good student. I plugged along, but he was a good student. And he'd gotten a job with the CIA, so we were up home, and then we went down for him to say goodbye to his folks. And we waited and waited, and he got called back. He was in the inactive reserve. He got called back during the Korean War. And he waited to be called, and we waited and waited and waited. And then I got pregnant with Lenore, and we didn't want to call anybody until after she was born. He went to Augusta. And George Carter was head of, I don't know how the reserve and the other things, but he was the man to see. He had been my father's roommate freshman year in college. Had we known, we'd have gone and done it sooner. But what they did, they called up 25 fellows with the same MO, took 3 and forgot to notify the others. So there were a lot of them in the same boat. So Hal knew they were interviewing over at the university, so he went over and he got a job right away. And it was at State Mutual in Worcester. So he came down on the train, and he was to get an apartment for us. Had to be furnished. We didn't have anything. Had to be on a bus line. We didn't have a car. So we hit Westborough. And the apartment we got was furnished with a broken wicker chair and a little wooden table lamp in the living room. And she always said, well, we're going to get more for you. Well, we didn't get much more for quite a while. And then our 2 bedrooms are upstairs. We shared the stairway and the bathroom, and she was wonderful. She never interfered. We had a great time there. But that's how we ended up down here. And thank heavens it was Westborough hit. Yeah. Not Northborough, Southborough. They're good towns, but none of them as nice as Westborough.
Well, I can certainly concur that Hal was a very bright guy.
Yeah.
I served on a couple committees with him, and always enjoyed his company. He was a good guy.
Yeah, he was.
Good guy. You lost Hal.
Yeah, I lost him in '81.
Yeah.
And we were at my daughter's wedding, and he dropped dead at the wedding reception. And it was a horrible thing to go through, but by the same token, the kids have always said, Mom, we were all there.
Yeah, that's right.
We were all there. That trip home was a long, long trip. But you do what you have to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, he went quick, and that was it. That was better than laying in a bed.
Yeah, that's right.
And
But you had another tragedy in your life.
yeah, I lost Kyle in 2000. He was my youngest son, and he had had a stroke when he was 3 years old. And he was, I don't say handicapped. I heard a young comedian on TV one day, and he had some problems. He says, I'm not handicapped, I'm handy-capable. And I always use that term with Kyle. He could do anything.
Yes, he could.
Except ride a bike, because his arm was spastic, and off he'd go. And one Sunday we came home from church, and Holly said, today you learn to ride the bike, Kyle. And I was upstairs talking with Hal when he was packing, and he'd fall off, and she'd say, get up. He'd fall. He'd get up on there again. Get up, get up, get up. And I thought, she's going to kill him before the day's out. But he never cried. He never said a word. And finally I said to Holly, I said, I don't think Kyle can ride a bike. He's going to be able to do everything up, but he can't because of that. Yeah. I tried to make a cone for the handle, but it was either too loose or too tight. And so we gave up on the bike. But he was the first one of his crowd that got his driver's license. And that was a big day.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he did everything himself. You say, can I help you? I'll do it myself.
He was a gutsy kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everyone thought a lot of Kyle. He was a good kid. We had wonderful neighbors. The group of kids, they never left him behind. And he rode on the back of more bicycles. And I've asked since, did you ever have an accident? And whether they're lying or not, I don't know. They said no, they never did. No one ever got hurt. They'd go to Quincy, they'd go over to Hopkinton or Ashland State Park or wherever they felt like going.
Yeah.
I'd make them all sandwiches in the morning. I wouldn't see them till supper time.
That was a different Westborough in those days.
Oh boy, it was great.
You could send your kids out and say, be home in time for supper. And that would be it.
I can remember Kyle coming home, and I saw him coming up Blake Street, and I thought, what is he carrying? He was carrying a 5-pound bag of flour, and he only had one arm. And I said, where did you get that? And he says, Mom, out by the airport, someone has dumped a lot of flour and a lot of cans of shortening. So I got in my car, because I cooked a lot, and I went out, and I picked it up, brought it home, and used it. The bags were intact. The cans, of course, hadn't been opened, so I had quite a bit of supplies. And what it was, they used to give out food like that to people that needed it, but the people didn't want to be bothered cooking. And so they were throwing it away. When I taught 1 year in Worcester, I started teaching when Kyle was a second grade. And the only food I got was food that the kids brought in. Their mothers didn't want, and I gave them recipes. You could make biscuits, and you could do this, pancakes and all that. No.
Where are the other kids now?
My children?
Yeah.
Mark is in Seattle, and he is a self-employed carpenter, very fussy. And he's been out there 20 years, I think. He went to school in Montana and liked it out there. But he sure would love to be home by the ocean here. It's far different. But he married a gal from Montana, and she comes from a big family, and she'd have to be away from her family. So he's happy there. Yeah. Lenore went to Drake University in Iowa, and that's Hal's fault, because he used to interview out there, and he thought Drake was great. She didn't go to look at the college. The day she left for college, that was the day she saw it.
Is that right?
And that's the same with Mark. We didn't have the money to go looking the way they do today.
Yeah, right.
And she loved it. And then she came home for a year, and she and Vicky Simonelli saved every penny they earned. Lenore worked in the bookstore. Vicky worked in Bradley's. And they went to Europe for 9 months, had a ball. And then Lenore decided to go back to Dubuque, Iowa, because there was a lot of theater. She was very interested in theater. And she's still there. And she and Doug own a theater company. And he doesn't have anything to do with it now because he teaches at the university. And well, it's not a university, it's a college, but anyway. And but Lenore puts on about 6 productions a year.
Great.
She writes some she directs, some she performs in. She does all kinds of things. She's
Great.
busy all the time.
Great.
And she's had several good-sized grants from the city and from the state. And right now she wants to do something with the late, I guess you'd call it the handmaiden to Martha Washington, the one that worked with Eleanor Roosevelt, and the one that worked with Lincoln's wife. She's going to start working on that.
Great.
And Holly's up in Portland.
Holly, right.
She was in Montana for a long time. And when Mark came home, Mark thought he ought to be home for me. And I didn't need anybody, but that was fine. I liked having him home. And he started doing his own carpentry here. And then he went back out west because Joni was there and they got married. But Holly came back and I said, don't come to Westborough, go to Portland. And I knew there was an apartment up there because a young girl from Presque Isle was moving out west. And I called her and I said, is the apartment available? And she said, yes. And I called the guy and I said, well, Holly has 2 cats. I don't care. And so she lived in Scarborough. And then Mark came home for a while and he went up there. And Portland's a wonderful city.
It is.
There's just so much going on, and it's a great place for young people.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And Holly's bought a home there.
Great.
Just put in a hot tub. And she called me last night. And she says, Mom, I just took my first time in the hot tub. She says, wonderful. And she said, you can go in when you go up. I said, no, thank you. Not interested.
She's your guardian angel at this point, isn't
she certainly is. She's here. When I got hurt, she was here. Well, you said to her, God knew what he was doing. She lost her job so she could take care of me. And but she calls me every day. Lenore calls me every day. And I said, there isn't any need of it. And they said, we'll do what we want. And Mark calls me just about every day.
Yeah.
And they're really good to me.
That's right. That's great.
And I went to Lenore's daughter's graduation in Minnesota last May. And I'll probably go. I went to Mark's son's graduation the year before from high school. And I'll probably go next year to his daughter's graduation. And but I don't. They travel home more because they like to come home.
Yeah, sure.
And Mark says, one thing I like about our house, Mom, he says, I can come in. He's always polishing his boots. He says, I know right where to go to find it because nothing changes. Everything's in the same place.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's what's neat about home.
Yeah.
Now, you've been very active in the town.
Yes. Jim Tashin's the one that got me into things. It's all his fault. I think I was on trustees first, church trustees. He asked me if I'd do that, and I said no, I couldn't do it. He said, of course you could do it. And I said, well, I'll have to ask Hal, because Hal traveled for 12 years.
Right.
He says, Polly, those days are gone. You don't have to ask. I said, yes, I do. I have to run everything by Hal. He said, of course you could do it. So I did that, and then from that, he asked me if I'd be on finance committee. And I was the first woman on finance committee, and I'll tell you, it wasn't pleasant to begin with, because some of those men did not want me there.
Pretty crude.
And one man, the chairman, he was awful. And the language he used, and I thought, you son of a gun, if you think you're going to get me off here, you're crazy. And he finally stopped. I think someone spoke to him. And I was on it 29 years.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, and I enjoyed every minute. I miss it. And I didn't do a lot of talking, although everybody tells me I talk all the time. But I didn't talk a lot on finance committees until I had something to say.
Well, you were great. I was on for 1 year and bailed out.
Yeah.
Got out. But you're also known for something that's sitting right here in front of us. And
Cookies.
That was everybody wanted to know when Polly's bringing cookies. Polly's the cookie lady of Westborough.
I don't know when I started that. Have no idea. But of course, I always made cookies for the kids, and then I started giving them. 1 year I did 30 gallons. I always do them by the gallon. And 1 year, because I'd give them to the man at the gas station, at the bank, and at the cleaners, and everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'd say, please return the jars. Well, a lot of people didn't. And I said, if you don't return the jars, you don't get them again. And I stuck to that.
Yeah.
But I still make them. I don't make a lot like I used to, but I do a measuring for about 30 batches up up ahead, and I have big wood aluminum containers. So when, like I made these this morning, you just grab, and I can do them in about maybe 30 minutes, maybe less than that.
They're great. They're great cookies.
And people say, why don't you make another one? I said, well, I did that once and took them over to the Hayes family, which I spend a lot of time with. And they said, what are you doing? Don't do it again. So I stick with, I know what I'm doing. I can make them in no time.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think of Westborough now?
I like Westborough. A lot of people say, oh, it's changed. And I said, well, I'll tell you, it either changes and grows or it dies, like my hometown.
Yeah.
I can drive down my hometown street and there's nothing. Yeah. And we used to be able to buy furniture. You bought everything in town. And I said, it goes one way or the other.
That's right.
And I think we've done well. And people think the taxes are high, but I think you look at other towns and they're pretty high. And I think we get a lot, good bang for our buck.
Yeah.
And I think we're well taken care of. I'm not at all unhappy. I feel like I want to get in there sometimes and do something, but I can't do as much as I used to. I'm getting old.
You're a gamer, though. You're a gamer. Well, I started out by saying she didn't think she was extraordinary, and I said she came from an ordinary background, which becomes extraordinary. To do all the things you did as a family growing up, what we would consider hardships, but you found pleasure in most of it, and you had a great upbringing, and you've come a long, long way, and you've done remarkable work with your kids. You've got a lot to be proud of.
Well, I've had fun doing it.
Yeah, and you are extraordinary.
Thank you.
And
we were always involved with the church. Dad, we had larger parish. It was 5 churches. And the minister preached at every church. You think you had it easy. He preached at every one of those churches every Sunday. It might be in the afternoon or whatnot, but he did. And Dad was the treasurer of the larger parish. And they owned a point of land out on the lake. And that was a summer camp. In the war, it was an army camp. Fellows that needed to get away from the base, they'd send them up there. And Mom ran the choir for 39 years, so needless to say, we all sang in the choir. And she always said she wasn't a musician, she was an organizer. Helen and I had to go home every Thursday at dusk because the choir met at our house. But it was a small church, but it was a very active church. Yeah. And I remember used to put suppers on. We didn't even have running water in the church. They'd have to go over to the parsonage and get the water. And we had 2 men that bought 2 tickets each because they ate so much. Yeah, and one of them is one fellow I used to fly with. I was a little bit afraid to fly with him because he was always turning around talking to me. We almost ran into a mountain one time. I said, Woofy, Woofy, there's a mountain. So up he went because you get that downdraft.
That's right.
And I had a lot of fun.
Yes,
I really had a lot of fun growing up.
Well, you've been a great person to know.
Thank you, Robert. Likewise.
Treasure you as a friend, and I thank you for being willing to do this.
Well, see, I didn't know what I was going to talk about, but I could talk all the time.
You've done good. You've done good. So thanks, Polly. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to do what I can for the town of Westborough. They've done a lot for me.
Super. Well, thanks again.